You're listening to I Have Some Notes, a podcast supported by listeners like you. To contribute, visit patreon.com/I Have Some Notes.
Gregg, here's a pitch. We remake famous films from the German expressionist era of the 1920s.
Cool. I think you could do something interesting with the cabinet of Dr. Caligari.
Oh, why stop at one? I'm thinking an entire franchise. The WCU, the Weimar Cinematic Universe. They all lead up to a big team-up with Caligari and Nosferatu and the Machine Lady from Metropolis. People love cinematic universes.
Do they love 100-year-old silent films?
They'll love what we tell them to love.
I have some notes.
Welcome, everyone, to I Have Some Notes, the movie podcast with cuts, keeps, punch-ups, and tweaks on mediocre movies. I'm your host, Liam Creswick.
I'm Scott C. Bourgeois.
And I'm Greg Beaver.
And today we are discussing The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, released in 1920. It's a 103-year-old film.
Yeah, going right back to the beginning of cinema.
And the beginning of horror.
Yeah, one of the earliest horror films.
Right back to before sound.
Yeah. And it's considered one of the great classic impressionist films, too. So it's very surreal and weird.
Mm-hmm. And as always, we'll just remind folks off the top, hey, why are you guys talking about a 103-year-old movie and not, and
not Ant-Man Quantumania.
What are you going to do, Ant-Man? God damn it.
When the actors get a fair deal, there is still a strike. We are still observing the request to not discuss struck work, even if other podcasts have shook their integrity and carried on talking about big, stupid blockbusters. Not us, crazy leftists. We're going to stand with we're gonna stand with the striking actors and watch 100-year-old movies.
That's right.
Out of solidarity and spite.
Downloads be damned.
I will say this. Say what you will about integrity and everything, but this did force us out of our comfort zone a little bit, and it allowed us to kind of experiment a little bit with trying something different. And one of the things that, and I'll credit Liam for this actually, that Liam suggested was remaking very old public domain movies. And honestly, when we did the Brain That Wouldn't Die, that was a ton of fun.
Yep.
It was really fun.
To the point where I'm like, we should definitely maybe do one of these a season at least, where we just take something super old and try to rejigger it for a modern audience. And we never would have tried this if we hadn't been no, you know what? We want to support the strikes and we're going to try to do our best. Whether or not we've totally succeeded remains to be seen by future peoples, but we've tried. We'll say that. And it's let us find some interesting stuff that we probably wouldn't have watched and probably wouldn't have discussed otherwise. So
yeah.
This
was not a film that was on my radar. I mean, the number of holes in my film history, these are movies that I should watch given how much I care and think about film that I just haven't yet. So it was good for me to I think this was actually the first silent film I actually watched from beginning to end. So there's a notch in my belt.
Yeah.
Nice. And you joked a moment ago about, downloads be damned, but I think this movie does have its fans even 100 and change years later. Specifically, I watched it on Blu-ray because I was telling a coworker about it. Shout out to my coworker Jonathan, who's like, dude, that movie rules. I have it on Blu-ray. Do you want it? And I was like, yeah, sweet. Yeah. So, and then also famously, have either of you ever seen the film? I put myself on the spot. It's got a long title. Give me a second. The Unbearable Weight of a Massive Talent with Nicolas Cage from a couple years ago.
Not yet.
Not yet.
It is on my to watch list.
Okay.
Yes.
It's not a spoiler or anything, but there is a scene or multiple scenes in that movie where Nicolas Cage cites his favorite movie as The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari. And that's where we got also some of the modern Paddington is a great movie discourse, like that kind of meme, but like the true meme that Paddington and Paddington 2 are great films. Cause Nick Cage makes Pedro Pascal's character watch Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, and then Pedro Pascal's character makes him watch his favorite movie, Paddington 2. And the two of them are like fawning over Caligari and then weeping at Paddington 2. It's a very fun. So, I think this movie has more fans than maybe we're giving it credit for.
Yeah, sure.
Between Jonathan and Nicolas Cage, we're in good company.
No, it is a stone cold classic, and there are a lot of older films from that period that are because they're foundational films, and that includes in the horror genre. That includes Nosferatu. That includes Metropolis. I know we made fun of them off the top with our pitch, but like they're all kind of lumped together because they're all from the same kind of time period, the same era. The same area, like the same group of directors were making these movies, and they were so influential to early film. Mm-hmm. And I feel like that kind of gives them a little bit of an untouchable aura. What not entirely true, I suppose, because Nosferatu has been remade.
There's untouchable. Can you remake it? And untouchable what we do, which is like it really drags in the third act. We're not doing that to this one. That would be absurd.
I suppose Metropolis.
Yeah, I mean, for one thing, there's 6 acts, so.
Yeah. But also, like, if we're giving this movie notes, note number 1, get a soundtrack and some dialogue. Like, it's, you can't really hold it to the same standards. So,
no.
But I'm excited to find out what we're going to do to bring it into the 21st century. But yeah, let's make sure, because I popular as it might be, I don't think everyone has seen it. And so we'll get you hip to some of the details and what exactly happens in this silent film. Of course.
Before Liam gets into that, you could take a hot minute, pause this podcast, just jump right onto YouTube and watch it for free right now, just to catch yourself up.
It's an hour 10. Like it's a really quick sit.
Yeah. It's even at an hour 10, it's not a quick sit.
You don't think so? Okay.
That hour and 10 felt like an hour and 40. It's not as long as any other movie, but it's as long as any other movie.
It's not paced, obviously, like a modern movie. So that, I think that's a little jarring. And maybe that's a little owing to my experience watching it, because I watched this with Aaron, and as soon as something is like as old as like 1970s and, into the past, we automatically go into Mystery Science Theater mode. Because with a silent movie, there's so much space around the plot points that it's very like you gotta fill the space with something. Like, I'm not watching this in the theater, so we were kind of like riffing on it the whole time. So I had a great time with it overall, and it did actually feel like it was breezing by. And mind you, like we weren't riffing on it in a way that was like detrimental. Like we were both often commenting about how cool the movie looked and what was going on and stuff like that, but also just like having a little bit of fun with it too.
Yeah, the soundtrack is literally just a soundtrack. There's no sound effects or dialogue or anything. So it invites commentary over top of it. Yeah.
Kind of. On that, did you I saw a couple different versions of this movie on YouTube, and I noticed that the soundtrack was different for different ones. So I watched a version of it that claimed to have been using the original tint of how they displayed it in theaters at the time. So like, did you guys have scenes that were like blue, scenes that were sepia, things like that?
Yep.
Right. We also we had a soundtrack that seemed, I'm pretty sure it was anachronistic. Like it was like there was like electric guitars in it and things like that going on. And like, it was awesome. Like, the soundtrack was, whoever did it was really cool, and it was super moody, but I really don't think that was the original soundtrack.
Nope.
Nope.
Probably not. Because I don't remember there being electric guitars in the soundtrack I was listening to.
There was kind of like,
I don't remember there being electric guitars in Weimar Germany.
No, yeah, like this was like sort of like jazzy, industrial, and synth wavy in places and stuff like that. Like, it was really like it. I really enjoyed it, but I'm pretty sure I got a different experience than maybe most people did.
Yeah,
Quite possibly.
That's the silent film equivalent of like, I accidentally watched it in French with English subtitles. I didn't realize. Does anyone else's Crave do that sometimes? I'll go to watch something and it'll be like in French for no reason, and I'm like, God damn it! And you have to like reload the app.
Yeah. Speaking of the unbearable weight of massive talent, for a while I couldn't watch it, and I didn't watch it on Crave because it was only in French for some reason, and I couldn't change it.
Weird.
Glad it's not me. So of course, The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, 1920 film, directed by Robert Wine, written by Karl Mayer and Hans Janowitz. The cast is Werner Krauss as the titular Dr. Caligari, Konrad Veidt as Cesare, Friedrich Ferrer as Francis, and Little Dagover as Jane Olsen.
That's exactly
I'm sure her name is, I know her name is Lil, like Lillian or whatever, but Lil, it's like, I'm going to call you like Lil Scrappy. So Lil Dagover, as Jane Olsen, the romantic, the only, like, classic movie, only one female. Yeah. At least, you know what? And at least in this case, nobody had speaking parts. So.
Yeah, it had no chance of passing the Bechdel test.
Scott, you want to hit us with that plot summary?
Francis sits on a park bench explaining to an old man how dark spirits drove him away from home and family. Not long ago, Francis and his friend Alan were just a couple of dudes living their best life at the Holstonwall Town Fair, drinking in the sights and non-sounds of various exhibits. At the same time, the mysterious Dr. Caligari is seeking a permit to exhibit his somnambulist, Cesare, from a town clerk. The clerk grants the permit, but not before ridiculing Caligari, and that night, the clerk is murdered. The next day, Francis and Alan, still hitting the fair pretty hard, attend Caligari's sideshow. Caligari promises that Cesare can peer into the future and predicts Alan will be dead by dawn. Shaking off the creepy experience, the two meet the beautiful Jane and spend the evening vying for her affection. But that night, Alan is also murdered. Francis, Jane, and her father, Dr. Olsen, begin an investigation. They catch a criminal in an attempted murder of an elderly woman, but the would-be killer denies any involvement in the previous murders. Suspicious of Caligari, Francis spies on him, seeing what appears to be Cesare tucked away in his cabinet, snoozing through a non-murderous evening. However, another apparent Cesare abducts Jane. Francis chases him down, leading to the sleepwalker's demise. When Caligari's sideshow is inspected, they find a dummy resting in Cesare's place. Caligari flees to the local asylum where he is discovered to be its director. His diary details his obsession with an 18th century murderer also called Caligari and the use of a somnambulist to carry out his heinous acts. With this evidence, the police subdue Caligari. Or so it seems, because it turns out that Francis himself is an inmate, and Jane and Cesare are fellow patients. The man Francis called Dr. Caligari is indeed the asylum director, who, having heard this whole story, is now confident he can cure Francis of his delusions.
Delulu, as the kids call it on TikTok.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a fun little framing device, and it's an interesting little twist at the end.
Yeah, the fact that it hit us with a legit twist. That also tracks not only to the broad audience of 1920, I feel like could pick up what was happening, but to me 100 years later, where like some of the film language that is often used to convey a twist like that is obviously not present. And there's like a brief moment where like, did I lose track of something? Oh no, it's a twist. And they didn't have some of the sort of like knowing winks and film grammar that Shyamalan might have.
Yeah.
So.
Well, and it tracks with the visual language of the film as well, that it's all in Francis's mind, because the sets are all like angular and stylized. The colors are, for a ostensibly black and white film, as we mentioned, there's different tints. So there's a lot of like weird color play going on. And it's very dreamlike. Which is appropriate because it's a movie about a murderous somnambulist, but it's also like it's happening inside this guy's head. And it's interesting that they can plant the seed of that with the way they're presenting it, so that in the end, it's like, oh, okay, no, that makes sense in hindsight. That all makes sense.
Yeah, it tracks. There's no dropped offers, no plot threads. And honestly, yeah, it looks cool as hell. I was telling Amanda, because she watched the sort of the back three of 6 chapters with me, and was like, it is one of the coolest looking movies I've ever seen, full stop. Like, regardless of the fact that it's 100 years old, just the passion and the love that went into the production design. I'm sure it was probably called something different, but like, yeah, the weird angles and the like deliberately like fun house sets, like looking out barred windows that are all at, polygonal angles. Oh, it's just so good.
Just weird non-Euclidean architecture all over the place.
Yeah,
Yeah, it has the feel of a weird stage play. And I mean that in the best possible way. Like, I mean that as the highest praise.
I think it actually only feels like a play because the camera angles are always from eye level looking straight on. Well, yeah, I bet if the one piece of modern technology they had was like the ability to pan and tilt and zoom and like dolly.
Oh, there'd be so many Dutch angles in this movie.
It would have made it. Yeah, there would have been Dutch. Like this movie predates sound and the Dutch angle. Therefore, they had to build the Dutch angles into their sets manually. They had to manually Dutch angle this delusion. Brute force it.
Perfect.
But the thing that really surprised me about the visuals was obviously like the sets are cool, but you can see that even from like the first screenshot you see if you Google it. What really captured me was the text with all of the dialogue. Because when you see a silent film, it's always that like sort of thin, evenly shaped, serifed font that we think of when we think of an old timey silent movie. Whereas this was like this chaotic green color. It was like there was no typography. Like there was no font set for this. It looked kind of drawn by hand, like an indie comic. But not even drawn by hand like an indie comic, because it was in these like chunky letters. The whole thing kind of looked like a Saul Bass intro. Like different kind of like tissue paper on layers. Yeah, I was really delighted with the text. It looked cool as hell, again, for any era.
And there's all sorts of like there's the use of I did not know that they had spent time like tinting film like that back in the silent era, which is obviously extremely smart to be able to do that and to set your mood appropriately, and so that was not something that I had seen before. But they're also using vignettes very effectively to introduce their scenes, focus your attention on certain characters, where they are placed within the scene, and things like that. And there are legitimately some scenes that are so well composited that they would not look out of place in a movie today. And I'm thinking specifically of the scene where Cesare is sneaking into Jane's room. Like, that is just a beautiful set, beautifully framed shot. Everything about it is beautiful.
Yeah. You talking where he's like leaning on the wall?
Mm-hmm.
He's like, sort of a weird pose, but yeah, it's very ominous and creepy and sneaky.
My one note for this movie is that speaking of Cesare and that particular scene is that I don't know why he died. He just seems to have I don't know if he just did he have a heart attack and he was just like running away, or what's the deal there?
Did he get like woken up, like how you're not supposed to wake up a sleepwalker?
I suppose that's possible.
According to the internet, he dies of exhaustion.
Okay.
Well, all he's been doing is sleeping. That doesn't make any sense.
Boy, is that ironic.
Yeah. Also, somnambulist, fun word. Had never heard that before. Was that your first time with somnambulist?
Oh, yeah, I had to look it up immediately.
No, I was actually familiar with the word somnambulism, so I assumed that a somnambulist was somebody who did somnambulism.
That makes sense, yeah.
Yeah, at first we were kind of riffing the movie because, like, the idea of someone placing a somnambulist in a fair, like, thrill as he sleeps, it just seems so silly. But obviously it turns out he has these powers of predicting the future or whatever. So, like, okay, fair enough. That's far more interesting. But yeah, at first it felt somewhat laughable.
I did sort of joke, this movie's so boring. There's a character that's asleep through the whole thing. But it's not a boring movie. I'm just joking. It was actually quite a good time.
Yeah. Oh yeah. To take this in a slightly different direction before we get to trying to remake it, I kind of went down a bit of a rabbit hole in researching Dr. Caligari, and I came across like several interesting videos, but the one I'm thinking of right now is something called From Caligari to Hitler. Did you guys? I think I sent it to you. I don't remember if you want it. Yeah. So in it, the narrator tells a story of like a group of Marxist film critics, which cool. Can I be one of those? That's what I aspire to. Who believe that because the film is because film in general is such a large collaborative endeavor, including like the inputs from writers and actors and directors and producers and the crew, that they open up a window into the collective consciousness of a society. And then like post-war or post-Great War Germany, filmmakers seem to be like preoccupied with authoritarian figures and their ability to extract agency from the public. Or in like Caligari's case, like, just a single person. Escapist cinema, I think, like they point out, is like it's not itself fascist. Like this, like things like Caligari itself weren't fascist or celebrating authoritarians, but they may have revealed how much the German public feared or fantasized about a tyrant. But what was perhaps most eyebrow raising about the video is that it concludes in a montage of like superheroes and other strongmen and authoritarian types in modern cinema, and like it's admittedly like pretty heavy-handed, but it touched on something that I've long been concerned about in our movies, like, and that's the power fantasy. Like, an alarming ratio of popcorn movies in my lifetime have been about a single man who takes it upon himself to right a wrong. And they're usually presented as like righteous or above the law,
they're following their heart. Like they're like, if you know in your gut what you're doing is true, go and do it.
Yeah. And action stars like Schwarzenegger and Liam Neeson and Keanu Reeves, they all like murder with impunity. And from the film's perspective, they're right to do so.
John Wick even.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Like he murders everybody. Like that is like that. I think like the overall takeaway from those films is like, you have to take control. You have to be the one to exert your will over everyone. Like you're right and everyone else is wrong. And I think about that often because I wonder about the totality of that effect that these movies have on our culture and in turn, like our worldview. And I wonder if it's like any wonder that we're standing here on the precipice of like an authoritarian coming in and tearing down what's left of our democratic institutions. And it's just like, yeah, it's, I just kind of wonder if we're in that same sort of position as Weimar Germany.
Yeah, you're right. That little bit at the end of that video is heavy handed, but we should share it with our listeners. Cause I was quite taken it. He does a really good job of laying it on quite thick in a way that you can't really argue with.
Yeah.
Yeah, like lots has been said about them. How the Marvel movies are just defenders of the status quo, or like a lot of the villains have a point. Your Killmongers and what have you. And yeah, I'm really glad you found that video, because my research was more just like on this era of film, this era as it relates to film history. Whereas this is more like, hey, let's look at this like notable point in film history and extrapolate something interesting about the world at large, which was quite profound. So, Behind the Lines was the YouTube channel. And we should definitely share that link when this video goes up, or this podcast goes up. Yeah.
So all that is just to basically say that like The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari is a loaded film. Both from a film history perspective, but also from like what was going on in Germany at the time, and maybe what it says about, the human condition as a whole. Which, I mean, like it makes sense to me why it stood the test of time, because it is there's so much to sort of take in and think about.
Yeah. I didn't have anything to add through that because you guys said it all very succinctly, but I also did watch that video. Yes.
Yeah. But nonetheless, we are going to drag this film kicking and screaming into the 21st century with our pitches on how to remake it, make it relevant, make it entertaining for modern audiences, maybe with less political baggage, maybe with more political baggage. Who's to say? But we're going to figure that out here when we come back.
I'd like to get more reading done, and joining a book club seems like a good idea, but I don't know.
Why not?
Reading a whole book in a month, that's pretty daunting.
What if it was just a chapter, say a week?
That doesn't sound too bad. Still, getting together with a bunch of people, that's a whole evening.
Well, what if it was only half an hour, whenever you wanted to?
That would be great.
The Read Along, a mini book club for your ears.
Join my wife Anita
and my husband Scott
as we take you on a journey through a good book, one chapter at a time.
Available right now on your podcatcher of choice.
Welcome back to I Have Some Notes. We are going to remake The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari for modern sensibilities. And I'd like to go first because maybe I think this is still in the spirit of the assignment, but my update is 100% cosmetic and 0% updating just about anything else. The plot, even maybe the dialogue and music. Because like the story in and of itself is like pretty tight, but there's also not a lot of story there that I think you could drag it out to an hour and a half plus for a modern audience. And the thing that is most endearing about this film is the design, not just the sets, but even the costumes. Like Dr. Caligari looks creepy and weird. That guy's got like weird face makeup on. Everybody's ghostly white. The text is amazing. So my pitch is, we're 3 years too late, but for the 100-year anniversary of this movie, you have all 6 chapters animated by different animators in like an anthology showcase of animation that stays fairly true to the original plot and even the original like text that shows up in the interstitials, probably even the music. You just get like modern update on whatever the true music was, maybe with cool guitars like Gregg's version. But you do it like an anthology, and you get 6 different animators to take a crack at each of the 6 chapters. And I think all that would do is like, cause the only thing that's a drag about this movie, the only thing that quote unquote doesn't work, it all works. It's a 100-year-old movie. What quote unquote doesn't work is that it is kind of boring pace wise, because all of the shots are, static shots looking straight on, and it can look cool as hell. But if there's no camera moving, if there's no dynamic action to the framing or the camera or anything, it is just kind of a drag. So if you animate it, all of those slow moments that are mostly just like belabored straight on shots in this movie become kind of kinetic and exciting because they're being animated, and they can put in Dutch angles. They can point the camera at different directions because it's animated. And I think it would just take what's already good about this movie, the aesthetic, the story, whatever, and turbocharge the boring parts by having, the dynamic aspect that comes with anything animated, right? Like even someone walking slowly through a garden can be interesting if it's animated well. But like watching Jane sort of meander through the garden, it's like that shot's too long. Like it's just a ghostly lady walking. There's a lot of like footage of people walking through cool looking sets. The sets are cool, but the walking isn't. So make the walking interesting by having it be animated. Before I continue, thoughts?
I was actually thinking more or less along the same lines. I was thinking about sort of the politics of remaking it, and how would you shield yourself against remaking, the very first horror movie and something that arguably is intrinsic to a particular artistic period of time, and and trying to take that and rebuild it for a modern audience. And I thought that I could really see this movie as like a marionette movie. Like I think that would be in like just like because it meshes so well with like the current aesthetic. Like not only is there some thematic reasons to do that, like if it's marionette, like Caligari is using Cesare as a puppet. There you go. But also like because we were talking about how the sets sort of play with perspective, and I often felt like the buildings were off perspective, like they were too small for the people who were walking on the set, and that would be very interesting, like a creep factor with like these weird moving marionettes living on a set like that, where the things around them are either too small or off perspective and things like that. I could really see that working really well in a creepy horror way, like giving yourself a reason to build something that's an artistic love letter to Dr. Caligari.
Artistic love letter is the the vein I was trying to strike. Yeah,
while also like shielding yourselves from like any sort of direct comparison to a classic, whereas like it maybe comes more like an experiment, or like I'm not sure what the word
it's an art project.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
It's like draw this in your style on Instagram. Like, hey, we're all gonna riff on Dr. Caligari. Scott, I want to hear what you thought, and then
Well, I mean, I like both of your pitches. I want to start out by saying that. Neither of them are modern remakes of this movie. They're both loving retellings of the original. They're not actual modern remakes.
They're not modern remake. Well, mine is a little more because you are remaking it and you're adding the artistic flourishes of each of the six. Greg, was that your pitch, or was that you just riffing on my idea?
Both.
Both. Okay.
Yeah.
Before I want to hear more about like your pitch for it. When I realized, like looking at the beautiful type and text, I realized I'm like, it's not really a remake. And it's also kind of just easy to be like, get 6 cool artists to do it. That's kind of a cop out. So I went a little harder than I maybe needed to. And after watching this, because I had time to kill, it's only an hour, 10 minutes. I watched a bunch of short films, like a bunch. And I found 5 that I think you could be like who I would give the role to. Cause I'm like, who could I name off the top of my head that I'd suggest? And I'm like, I got salad fingers and then ran out of ideas. So I was like, well, I better do my homework. And so I watched a bunch of short films. So maybe we'll do it at the end, just cause it is a bit, not rambly. I think it's interesting, but I have 5 short films I want to recommend to our listeners, and why each one of them had something I think would contribute well to the aesthetics and themes of Caligari. I didn't get to 6, but I left one open because I knew you guys would have a suggestion. Greg comes in with puppets. Love it. So I'm not just being like, hey, get a bunch of animators to do it. And that was, wash my hands of it. I did my homework, and I'm backing this pitch up with possible draft picks. So
I think you should give them now because we're on the topic of it.
On the topic? Cool.
Yeah.
Okay. If you'll indulge me, I'll try to keep it tight. So the way I started filtering them first was I tried to watch all the Oscar nominated short animated films from the past couple years. And there's lots of good ones, but not all of them were creepy or had anything that would like suit this style. So I had to go start digging through YouTube recommendations and also browsing around Canopy. Canopy is the service that your library, sort of like, it's the streaming service for the library.
If you've got a library card, you can get Canopy for free, and we highly recommend it.
Or Hoopla, it's called in some places, or like a different one called Hoopla. But yeah, libraries have their own streaming services now. Talk to your local library. Highly recommend. So this first one I found on Canopy, but I will share a link to it on Vimeo. It's called The Periwig Maker. It's from 1999, and based on a Daniel Defoe novel, A Journal of the Plague Year from 1722. Whole thing's narrated by Kenneth Branagh. It's pretty good. It's like a stop motion animated thing about a guy who's locked away during the plague, making wigs and trying to think about why this plague is killing everybody. And it just looked really slick. It was really well done stop animation, and the main character has the same kind of ghastly, ghostly white face as Cesare and even the other characters at times. And so I think this would make a strong first chapter. I was basically going to have chapter 1 and chapter 6 be stop motion to sort of represent quote unquote reality. But obviously the stop motion in number 6 is a little more intense. In fact, I'm going to skip right ahead to 6. Any chance I can talk about my favorite movie of recent times, Mad God, by Phil Tippett. I will take that shot. Go watch Mad God. It's amazing. Phil Tippett was a miniature animator, did a bunch of stop motion stuff. Like he worked on Jurassic Park. He worked on basically any movie, blockbuster movie with little miniatures. He probably had a hand in it. And his recent film, Mad God, is like truly gross and ugly and unhinged. And I think would make a nice juxtaposition to the very clean, crisp style of the Periwig Maker in the first chapter. So first touch of reality, super clean. Number 6, Phil Tippett's deranged brain. One of them would be Gregg's marionette thing. I love that. That looks cool. Watched a great short film called The Flying Sailor. It's a Canadian one that you can watch on YouTube or on the National Film Board of Canada's website. And it's about a sailor who gets blown up in the Halifax explosion and flies 2 kilometers in the air before landing and lives to tell about it. It's based on a true story. An apparent true story. It's a trip. So yeah, this like 8-minute short film is just this like animated naked soldier flying through the sky, having his life flash before his eyes. And why I like this one for Caligari, the illustrations look kind of like any illustration you'd see in like the New Yorker, like very kind of modern, like minimalist, like accompanying a long read in a magazine. But it's intercut with these, the stuff flashing before his eyes are like real footage, tinted kind of the same way Caligari is tinted, and often shown through like not peepholes, like porthole framing, like circular framing, which Caligari does a lot as well. One thing I did like about Cabinet of Dr. Caligari is the weird wipes where they would have like the bottom half of the frame would be like an image and it would like wipe by just expanding the frame. I don't know if you guys noticed that. Pretty effective. Anyway, there were shots in this Flying Sailor short that looked like shots from Caligari. So I would give them probably one of the earlier chapters. Canadian filmmakers Wendy Tilby and Amanda Forbes. Very cool one. If nothing else on this video you watch, I do recommend go find The Flying Sailor. It's a great little short. And Canadian. Found a weird YouTube one called Behind Closed Doors. That was made by a guy named Johnny Button of Button Studios. It was really popular. One of like the early YouTube short films, to the point where he remade it years later after being better at animation. And what I like about this one, it's like about a kid, whatever. He's afraid of monsters in his closet, but the real monster's his abusive dad. It's fine. I don't really recommend you watch the video, except just go look at shots of it. The way this guy animates it, pretty simple drawings, but the textures, the color is like photos, or at least really photorealistic textures of skin, of fabric, of wood. So like the wooden wall is like a picture of wood. the carpet is carpet. And it just gives it this really eerie feeling because you're seeing these kind of like cartoon drawings with real skin. And when you think about Dr. Caligari in this movie, like the actor like scrunching up his face in his little circle glasses, I think it would play really well with that guy's aesthetic. And then last but not least, have either of you watched Love, Death, and Robots on Netflix?
Yep.
Yes. we're both nodding to Liam, and that gets really across in a podcast medium.
So yeah, there's Love, Death, and Robots, a Netflix series with just like short sci-fi films in anthology form. And there's one in particular called Tall Grass that was season 2, episode 5, directed by a guy named Simon Otto. Honestly, doesn't matter if it was in the short, it was kind of fine. But the thing I really liked about it was the character design, like the puppet model design, because it was a CG. This one was CG, like 3D models. Had the same polygonal shapes as the Caligari set and the same textures and brushes as the Caligari set, like the big chunky brush strokes that you can see on all the sets. If you're having a hard time visualizing it, honestly, that Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle Mutant Mayhem movie that just came out recently, same vibe, same difference. So that kind of aesthetic for one of the other chapters. So those are my pitches for the animators I give this to, and I will share all of these short films over on our Discord if you want to join our Discord.
Yeah, we can also put them in our show notes too.
Thank you for letting me ramble. I don't know how else to do it, but that was my pitch, was like you get some really cool animators to do an artistic love letter to this period of art history. Because that's what it is. Film history is art history, and this is a period of art history.
I love you guys both. I think this is an incredibly good idea. This is a fitting tribute and love letter to a very important piece of cinema. I, however, am a Hollywood producer, and I don't give a damn about art. I want to drag you both kicking and screaming into the 20th century. So, to hell with your idea.
Okay. Fair.
I was sensing a
This would be for film nerds. This would be like Caligari at 100. Like,
yeah. But you know what? I don't want my movie to appear just at the Metro and other art houses. I want it to appear at Halloween time in front of sold out audiences across America. So I need jump scares and I need modern stuff. So that's what we're going to do. I don't know necessarily about jump scares, but I took this as how would I retell this story to a modern audience. And I realized there was a lot of, period specific stuff that you just have to kind of jettison. And you just kind of have to reinvent it from using like modern pop culture. Like people don't go to the fair and see a freak show anymore. That's not done. But you know where people do stuff for clickbait?
Yeah.
Social media.
Oh boy.
And so I immediately was like, this is a psychological tech thriller. Where Francis,
I'm into it.
Francis and Alan are both like teenagers. They both are maybe in high school, maybe in university. And they hear about this kind of like underground channel, online where this guy who's this kind of like Jordan Peterson type, like he's got like credentials. He's a psychologist, but he's got this like weird, like YouTube channel or something where he goes live and he does this hypnotism thing and he has his cabinet and he's got his Cesare. He's got this patient of his who in a hypnotic trance while he's asleep can apparently like tell people's fortunes. He can see the future. But it's always dark stuff, which is why it's this underground thing. And then you kind of build off of that. And that's where you still get the murders. You've still got the little love story going on with Jane and Francis, but you amp up the tension as Francis continues to like investigate this channel. Like he starts to get targeted after Alan gets murdered. And now he's got this like creepy sleepwalk. And I think you really turn up the creep factor on Cesare. Like he's this sleepwalking murderer who's being mentally controlled through like subliminal messages by this crazy psychologist. Like you can have like a huge slasher vibe going on with that. You can have some jump scares. It still culminates with him breaking into Jane's house and taking her. And then like he gets chased down. I think you have a much more violent end for Cesare because you want to make it a little more modern and actiony. You get the reveal that the doctor who's going by Dr. Caligari is actually like a discredited guy or something. And you still have it build up, I think, to the twist where it turns out that Francis is actually on like a YouTube channel and he's telling this story for clickbait. I think that's the way you twist it in this one. He's not
I was going to
inmate.
say, because you can't do a sane asylum, but if it's really him just telling this like
he's the one telling this story for clickbait online and someone else is watching him. And I think that's the twist that you have at the very end.
Mm-hmm.
So like, I don't have a lot of like specific beats because I think that you can still tell this story, but you tell it in a way that amps up the action, amps up the body count to make it a real slasher. So Francis has more friends than just Jane and Alan who also get targeted. Yeah, and you make it this weird psychological slasher movie with like this like creepy tech bent where it's all coming off of this underground like video channel where this guy is doing this really dark stuff for clicks.
Have either of you seen Gerald's Game?
I have not watched it yet. No.
It is very good. It's on Netflix if you want to check it out. But warning, spoilers for said Gerald's Game. As you were talking, it just reminded me of this one particular bit of Gerald's Game with like the movie. I guess I have to describe the plot a little bit. So Carla Gugino and Bruce Greenwood are having sex. He ties her up. She gets stuck to a bed, and then he has a heart attack while she's tied up. And then the movie just plays out with her being stuck in this bed, and then a bunch of weird stuff happens. One of the weird things that happens is that there's this big giant guy with piercing gold eyes, and he kind of looks. Do you know Mr. Hom from The Next Generation? That's kind of what he looks like, and he like it's very creepy. But it's always like an open question about whether this guy actually exists or not, right? And I'm thinking the same thing for Cesare and Francis, where we have Francis see whether it's a tech thing or not, or whether this is like a period piece and he actually does go to the fair. It's a kind of a situation where it's more as if he's imagining the threat. Maybe like his friend does die, but the circumstances surrounding his death are more obscure, right? Like they could have been drinking at the fair or whatever, or the bar. And when they meet Jane, this is all after Alan gets told that he's going to die or whatever. They have this crazy night, and then it's sort of like he does die, but like it's sort of like ambiguous about the murder. But then Francis begins to imagine this creepy threat where he is continually stalked by this skulking somnambulist weirdo who's always, if you want those jump scares, you can have him pass in the shadows, and then you can mimic those great shots from the original where he's slinking along the walls in this crazy town, or he's approaching Jane from inside her bedroom and things like that. But I think that gives you an opportunity to have that twist at the end where you kind of get to go either way. Like, is Cesare was he a real threat all along or not? Or was it always in Francis's head?
I like that. I think I would tweak it a little bit because I do want my slasher movie kind of climax. I think you can build the tension by having some of the early deaths be super ambiguous And Francis starts to suspect that it has something to do with this channel, with this Caligari guy, with this somnambulist, but he can't put his finger on it. He can't prove anything. But he also starts to feel like the paranoia mounting. He starts to see Cesare around. He starts to like he's slinking around in the background, like you say. But at the point where Jane gets abducted, that's the point where it becomes clear, oh no, Cesare's real. Caligari is like mind controlling this guy to do murders. Like that's where the plot kind of coalesces. And then you can have like the showdown between Francis and Cesare, which again, in my version, it's not Cesare just runs until his heart gives out. He like, there's a confrontation. There's like slasher movies. I think it would be really cool if he was clearly like asleep while like trying to murder a guy. The creep factor for me is just really high on that.
Yeah.
Plus then there's the added bonus of like Cesare is himself a victim, a helpless victim of Caligari's, right? Because he's not consciously aware of what he's doing. He's not doing it by his own free will. And then of course at the end, it turns out it's all a story anyway, that Francis is making up to, up his Reddit score. So
yeah, I was thinking about that aspect of it. The sort of the twist being like Francis is doing it deliberately. And I don't necessarily think it needs to be a like, I'm not crazy, you're crazy twist. But I do like this something of the subversion where it doesn't have to be, it doesn't have to be the I'm not crazy, you're crazy twist, but I do want Caligari to go from being the problem to being the guy who's like, I can fix the problem, you're the problem. That twist being like, who's the problem, who's the villain? And not really knowing, having it be kind of ambiguous, because the film as it stands is meant to be somewhat ambiguous. Like, whereas yours seems pretty cut and dry that this guy's like spinning a yarn for clickbait.
Fair enough.
And I you just pitched it, so this isn't a fully baked idea, but you had sort of compared Caligari to like a Jordan Peterson type. And so what if like, instead of going to his sideshow, they're taking his classes and then finding out that this guy, when he's not teaching questionable ethics classes and questionable psychology classes, he's running this weird Twitch channel on controlling people who are asleep, kind of like a bit of a red pill, like, are you sleeping or are you awake thing?
I like that.
And then everything plays out like you said, yada, yada. And then it's revealed that actually Professor Caligari, Dr. Caligari, is studying the online trend of these like sleepwalking murder kids who think that they're somnambulist pilled, like the somnambulist pilled subreddit of like, you can exert your control by activating stim. And really it's like Caligari isn't this murderer. He's the guy studying this online trend of murderers. And that's just kind of keeps a little bit more of that, like, well, who really was doing it? Who really is the murderer thing that's in the original where, like I said,
so you're basically saying that in the end, it turns out that it might not have been Cesare, but it might have been Francis the whole time who was doing the murders.
There's a million Cesares, and there's a million. It gets a little Fight Clubby. Like there's a million Robert Paulsons. There's like, we're all Robert Paulson. Yeah,
that sparked a slightly different idea, because I love the idea of Francis taking classes, and it's just this sort of like questionable professor who's bringing like subjects to the class. And like that he's ostensibly sort of like experimenting on, and like the ethics of it are very, very questionable. But like, what if this is a movie about like sleep paralysis, and like Dr. Caligari is using people's sleep paralysis to sort of like control them in the way that like in the movie proper, he's using somnambulism to get people to do his bidding or whatever. And that way, that kind of like opens up the door for him to like convince Francis that he can help him with his sleep paralysis. And the reason why I think about sleep paralysis is because like often people describe sleep paralysis as being awake but seeing some kind of demon or witch. Some people describe it as like it just being out of their vision, but they know it's there. Some people just straight up see it, which is creepy as fuck. Like just like seeing like a demon in the doorway and you can't do anything about it. So like if Francis has this sort of like paralyzing thing about him and then he gives in to Dr. Caligari, then that opens up the door to swing from something that is like sort of like modern into something that's visually more like Caligari, because you get to access these dream sequences, these sleep paralysis sequences, and then you can it opens you even more up to like being able to have that question of like dream, not dream, reality versus not reality, and so on and so forth, which are part of what the Dr. Caligari proper is about.
Yeah, there's some interesting stuff you could play with that.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, but that, like, I love that idea, Liam, of just like this sort of like unhinged professor kind of angle. I think that's cool.
Yeah. I think it's much more. Sorry.
Oh, the twist is like he's not an unhinged professor doing crimes. He's a hinged professor studying these creepy behaviors.
Right. Yeah.
Well, and I think that's a good, more modern take on the asylum director. Yeah, and again, yeah. I think that the like weird Twitch channel is a good take on the modern like sideshow attraction, right?
Yeah,
because we're doing something shocking to get the views.
Yeah,
and in this case, the shocking is I'm going to have my sleepwalking patient predict your doom, and then people start dying from it, and then there's some question of like, oh, is he making it happen? Is it just like, is it real? I don't know. And then Francis starts to have delusions, and yeah, he could be a patient of Caligari's right off the top, who then also finds this thing which makes him really like maybe he's not taking classes, maybe he is a patient, and then he hears this guy's also got this thing going on, and that really messes him up, because now this is my doctor, this is the guy who said he can help me.
Yeah, that's like as soon as you said Peterson, I was like, oh, classes, but no, maybe he is like a patient who finds out his doctor has this weird side hustle.
Kind of a blend of both of your ideas, yeah.
Nice,
because then you can keep the sleep paralysis thing, which I do like actually.
Speaking of Gregg, did you want to elaborate on your marionette pitch at all?
No, I pretty much had laid it all out, so it's all good.
Nice, okay.
Yeah, I didn't really. Unlike The Brain That Wouldn't Die, I didn't have a fully formed thought about, but I honestly just kept thinking about the authoritarianism of it all, and that was what sort of dominated most of my thoughts while I was thinking about this movie. So yeah, what I was primarily focused on as far as like remakes is just like, how do you do it in a way that like, because it is such a unique film, like you have to acknowledge that uniqueness in some way. So like, how do you do that by paying
and that's
the most respect possible to the movie?
And that's why I ended up with animated thing. I know Scott's kind of holding my feet to the fire on the spirit of the exercise, but it really is like you can't really, unlike The Brain That Wouldn't Die, which was our first one of these that we did, where like for all intents and purposes, the people making that movie in the late 60s had access to all the modern film technology. If not that we have, at least better films. They were making better movies next door in the 60s, so they could have fixed some of those problems. Whereas Caligari was like top of its class when it came out, so really there's no notes.
It's one of the movies that was inventing film language for horror movies. Like, yeah.
So it can only be this sort of like love letter to what it stands for, as opposed to something that you can like harvest for inspiration. Like it's already inspired. It's already been the source of inspiration.
Yeah,
for
it's already
years,
baked into the horror genre writ large already. Yeah. So like, I think what Scott is pitching is like, it's like a popcorn affair type horror movie, which which may result in, like, if were it actually made, it may result in a whole lot of eye rolling and vehement frustration of film critics, maybe even by people such as ourselves. Like, I think that's kind of, that's funny to think about, but yeah, like I think you're right. I think that, I think that's more in the spirit of the exercise of the episode. But certainly, like, were it to be remade and you get this kind of, what would be like a modern horror that's sort of like that. I started thinking of Searching when you mentioned like tech stuff or whatever, but like, obviously that's not what you're going for, but
or like we all go to the World's Fair.
Yeah.
Yeah, and don't misunderstand. I really liked Liam's pitch.
Of course,
I would I would go to the Metro and watch the hell out of that.
Yeah.
But yeah,
it's not surprising that to me that you pitched something like that, because you're such a fan of, what was that Shrek thing?
Shrek Retold.
Yeah.
In our,
so, like,
follow us on Patreon. I have some recs where people recommend things. And one of my recommendations was Shrek Retold, where a bunch of animators, hundreds of them, took a scene or two from Shrek and did it in their own style. Not even animators. There's live action stuff.
Yep.
And it was sort of in that very much in that vein of like, that's a 1-to-1 source of inspiration to this. Or even just things like anytime you get anthologies of animation, I'm a big fan. Love, Death and Robots on Netflix is great.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, our listeners had some great insights and comments as well. Thank you to everyone who contributed. Please follow us on social media. Wherever there's social media, we're doing it. And you can find us by putting I Have Some Notes into the search bar, or put me or Greg or Scott's name in, and then you'll see us retweet it. You'll get there. Ian Wallace says, consider making it about 20 minutes long. The story isn't long or complicated. Modern audience expectations regarding pace are considerably different than those of the 1920s. Consider a bold, angular approach to set design, but perhaps without the temptingly obvious Tim Burton flourishes.
Yeah. I definitely thought about Tim Burton while I was watching this. And you can see he was heavily influenced by it. Yeah.
I'm pretty sure he was. It'd be hard. I'd be surprised if he wasn't.
Yeah.
The other thing I like about Ian's comment here about just crunching it down to 20 minutes long, I think all of us were trying to tiptoe around the problem Gregg addressed early on of like, how do you remake this and not invite comparison? And each one of us tried to find a solution, like unflattering or, why bother comparisons, right?
Yeah.
And each one of us got around that in our own way. And I like how Ian does it here of just being like, do it pretty true and just make it 20 minutes long. Like, make it a short film, because then it's not one movie against the other movie.
Mm-hmm.
It's one movie. Like, it's that same, like, just end up doing a love letter, but the love letter is a 20-minute short film.
Yeah.
As opposed to a full adaptation, remake, whatever.
Or maybe it's like an anthology of silent films that are sort of like compressed into, and so you can kind of do like
could you do this for Metropolis and Nosferatu?
Yeah.
And then also you can like try to play with some of the same techniques, like the tinted colors, the static camera, set it at the same time. You can still have sideshow, like then you can keep it as a period piece. Period piece in our case, it was just a piece when it came out. But yeah, that's the other way is you can do it pretty true by just like speeding through all of the limitations of a film from the 20s. So, yeah. Nothing else to say, says Robert Eggers and Willem Dafoe need to be attached to it.
I mean, Willem Dafoe is obviously the Dr. Caligari of my version, right?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, Robert Eggers would probably crush this, I think. So
yeah. I think he would crush it if you gave him like just remake Dr. Caligari. Boom, he's done it. Like
I think he would be the guy that yeah. Who do you cast in Scott's version? Just like everyone take a character. You think Defoe is Caligari?
I think Defoe would be a suit. Like I think he could do like the weird doctor aspect of it very well. Yeah. Especially like doing like monologues. Obviously, if you're basing this guy on Jordan Peterson a little bit, he's going to have a monologue at some point. The very opposite of a silent film. And I could see Defoe absolutely crushing something like that. And I think he could do it really creepy. He's played Max Schreck in Shadow of the Vampire, which was a riff on Nosferatu. So he's already done stuff in this time period, kind of playing up that creepy factor. Yeah, I think he'd be good.
I'll take Cesare. I think Timothy he already has the kind of the look
for Cesare.
Yeah.
See, I think it's Robert Pattinson for Cesare.
Yeah, that would work too. Yeah.
And then thinking about Scott's got him as teenagers or young people. Who do you get as like a youth? You know, because I think anyone we pull is gonna be old. But for Francis, I had it and lost it. Fuck. I mean, Timothy Jiminy as Francis would work, but no, I had a really good. Oh, you do like a Will Poulter would kind of work, I think maybe.
Yeah.
Because he's got a bit of this sort of gooberish, like my friend died. What is this guy doing? I love Jane so much.
I could see like was this like a Steinfeld? No, is that his name? He's the actor that you really like a lot, Liam. What's his?
Lakeith Stanfield.
Lakeith Stanfield. Sorry, there we go.
That's fair. I think you do him if you're doing a like set it in an old timey period version, but I think in Scott's version where they're high school or college age,
sure.
Unfortunately, both Robert Pattinson and Lakeith Stanfield are too old.
Yeah.
Well, Robert Pattinson, not necessarily if he's playing Cesare.
Cesare, yes, no, but for the young Francis and Alan. So
yeah, fair.
Though Lakeith Stanfield also make a good Cesare, right? Like
I was thinking
he's the guy who looks at the camera and yells, "Get out!"
That's fair. I think he would also make a pretty good Francis too.
That's fair. Yeah, in the right context.
Yeah.
Tack says, "I don't know what I would change story wise, but I kind of know what it should look like. The cinematography should start off very cold and objective, and as it teases at Caligari, the colors start to warm and the camera starts to move dynamically." That's my biggest problem. I was like, let's just get that camera moving and everything solves a lot of problems. When Caligari shows up, the scene becomes brighter and everyone acts more lively. Costumes and sets start to shift as reality seems to bend around him, though no one seems to notice. By the time Francis is chasing him into the asylum, they're running through impossible architecture and rooms that belong in different buildings and genres. Francis's clothes slowly change from heroic to villainous, and Caligari becomes framed as an innocent running for his life. When Caligari is trapped, Francis starts an evil, anger-fueled monologue, but stops, realizing the manipulation right before getting knocked out. Then yada yada yada, eventually Caligari dies, and immediately the cinematography returns to cold objectivity.
It's an interesting take on it, yeah.
Yeah, I think I like that.
I interesting he says Caligari dies because in the film it seems like he doesn't die in this movie, so I'm wondering where that comes from.
I think he's just using that as a way to have fun with the cinematography, the cinematography itself being so communicative of what's going on. So like when he dies, the grip he has on the distortion of reality also folds away.
Yeah, I played with the idea of doing something with my modern remake, and the truth is, and this is one of the reasons why I like Gregg and Liam's kind of loving animated homage to Dr. Caligari a lot, is because that can replicate the style and the sets and the weird palettes and the typography in a way that I think like a modern thriller psychological slasher movie can't. And I know that if you did that in my version, it would just be like people would roll their eyes because it would be very obviously me like, oh, we're going to cram a little bit of the original in there. And it's like, no, that's a product of its time. That's a product of that movie. And I'm trying to retell the story. I'm not trying to remake the movie, if that makes sense. Because I can't capture that lightning, but I can retell that story. That's a great distinction. Yeah.
You can retell the story. And if you try to retell the story and remake the movie, like you're saying, like what wouldn't work, your best case scenario is Sucker Punch. Like your best case scenario, Sucker Punch. So. And then Michael Davis says, have you guys ever thought about doing Ed Wood's Plan 9 from Outer Space? It's considered one of the worst movies ever made. It's a premise of aliens trying to take over Earth by bringing the dead back to life. So it sounds promising. Also, I think it's public domain. We love that suggestion, Michael. And frankly, we just love hearing from you guys about these episodes that we've been doing, these remake episodes, a product of adhering to striking actors' requests, but like Scott said off the top, the kind of thing that's pretty fun, and we're gonna probably keep doing them. So if you like these episodes, please let us know in the comments of wherever you're interacting with us on social media. Come over to our Discord. You can get the link to it. ihavesomenotes.com on our link tree. Let us know if you're vibing on these, because like we also said off the top, not all, talk about 100-year-old movies versus big tentpole blockbusters. Not always something people are gonna maybe make time to listen to. So we're trying to balance the what do you guys want to hear versus what do we want to do versus what do we want to honor. So your feedback, very appreciated. So if we were to do another one like this, is it something you'd want to hear? And if we did, is it Plan 9 from Outer Space?
I will say that when it comes to bad movies, they're often harder to fix. And our sweet spot, we discovered a long time ago, tends to be like middling movies where there's something really good there. It just needed to be improved. And we often struggle the most when we're dealing with something that's so bad that we really have to start rebuilding it from the skeleton, or something that's quite good that it's really close and it's really hard to find those the screws that needed tightening.
Yeah.
Plan 9 from Outer Space would be a challenge, I feel.
I think
he's a famously bad director.
Oh, for sure. I think if we're approaching it from the remake point of view, where it's it is sort of like building it up from scratch, that makes things a lot easier.
That might be the only way we could do it. Yeah.
Even some bad movies have a kernel of an interesting idea on it, and trying to see if you can tease that out, I think would be a lot of fun. Mm-hmm. So is there a way you can tease aliens trying to bring the dead back to life to take over the world? Is there a way you can make that interesting? Maybe not. Who knows?
Probably, I would say.
Yeah.
Certainly willing to find out. Highly likely if we do one of these again, that'll be one of the picks, but we'll see. We shall see. But that's the kind of feedback we love. So if you want to follow us on social media, facebook.com/ihavesomenotes, @ihavesomenotes on X. We're on Blue Sky. We're on Instagram, but most importantly, we're on Discord. Please come join us in the Discord. It's so much fun. Or at the very least, subscribe, rate, and review on your favorite podcast app that you're using right now.
Yeah. You can also head over to patreon.com/ihavesomenotes if you'd like to throw us some monthly financial support. Helps keep the lights on. We appreciate all of our patrons, and we would like to appreciate you the same way we appreciate them, by giving them some extra bonus content and treating them a little bit nicer in the Discord. Sorry to all the non-patrons in the Discord. We definitely treat them nicer.
And in 2 weeks, we'll be taking on a Duncan Jones directed film, and obviously we're not talking about Warcraft because we are still not doing Struck work. But he did do a movie on you can watch on Netflix right now called Mute. That is, according to IMDb, about a mute bartender goes up against his city's gangsters in an effort to find out what happened to his missing partner. So it is, I think Duncan Jones is, definitely an up and down filmmaker. This is one of the down ones, so it's right in our wheelhouse. So we'll see you then.
Yeah, you got 2 weeks to watch it, and it's not Struck work because it's British and German, European movie.
Technically, yeah, we had a little technical slide in there. Sidle in.
Yeah, hope you'll watch that so you can join us in 2 weeks' time. Until then, I've been your host, Liam Creswick.
I'm Scott C. Bourgeois.
I'm Greg Beaver. Keep watching the skies.